Hi YouTube, my name is Jack, and today we are going to talk about some conversations that you as a seeker should try to have with your coven leaders prior to initiation. These are not conversations for early on in the relationship. These aren't conversations for when you first start seeking. But if you've reached a point where you have been talking to, training with, however your group does it, if you've been with a group for a while and initiation is on the table, if you have asked for initiation, they have offered initiation, you've had a conversation, and that's the direction that you're moving in. These are some things that it's worth discussing with your coven leaders before the night of initiation. Note that every group is going to handle these topics differently. Every group is going to have different boundaries around what they do and do not feel comfortable discussing. And I'm not in any way suggesting that a group will or should give away the farm here. But I think initiation is something that requires a great deal of trust. And part of what that means is that trust has to be earned. And I think that that trust has to be earned in part by having some very serious and very frank conversations before you're sort of knocking at the door, so to speak. So, first things first, um, initiation involves taking an oath of secrecy. This is well known. Gardnerian initiates, and I mean other forms of traditional Wicca as well, but since I'm Guard, that's what I'm going to talk about. Gardnerian initiates are bound by an oath of secrecy. That's no surprise. But I think if you're going to walk into a ritual where you're taking an oath of any kind, including but not limited to an oath of secrecy, uh, it's important for you to have a sense of what it is that you're signing up for. And whether that's a commitment that you are able and willing to make. Um, Different groups handle this differently. I know of some groups who will shortly before initiation, like the day before initiation, will provide their potential initiates with a copy of the oath that they can read over because those groups feel very strongly that it's not appropriate for them to ask someone to swear an oath that they're going into blind. I think those groups are probably a minority. Most of the groups I know would not give someone a copy of the oath in advance, even if it's like 24 hours in advance. But even if you don't have the text of the oath itself, it's worth having a conversation about, broadly speaking, what sorts of things are covered by that oath. What are the expectations that are being set for you when you take this oath? And again, there may not be specifics. The group may not be able to provide you a lot of details, but you should have a conversation in broad strokes. For my own part, the thing that I like to tell people is that the oath is personal. Each initiate's oath is theirs to interpret according to their understanding of the oath they have sworn. But there are some broad areas of agreement. And generally speaking, the expectation that I try to set for my people is when you take initiation, when you take the oath of secrecy, you are agreeing at minimum not to reveal to outsiders the names of the gods, the identities of other initiates, and the details of what occurs in any initiatory ritual. There are variations, right? Everyone has their own boundaries around what they do and do not consider appropriate. But I think that those are broadly uncontroversial points for the oath, and I think that's a good sort of baseline to set for expectations around what exactly people would be swearing to or signing up for if they proceed with initiation. I think that's an important conversation to have, however your group is going to navigate it. Secondly, and this is sort of related to the conversation about expectation setting with the oath, expectation setting in general. What are the expectations of you going to be as an initiate? And how are those different from the expectations that were set for you as a seeker? Does the group meet more frequently, less frequently? Are you expected to attend every single meeting? Like, is there an attendance policy, What is the scheduling like? What kinds of contributions or study are you going to be expected to do as an initiate? So there are some groups, for example, that have um, a really rigorous like study program for pre-initiates, and you write essays and you have homework assignments, and then after initiation there might be a similar curriculum. There might still be a training curriculum for new initiates, or there might not be. And it may be that the sort of really structured learning takes place pre-initiation, and then after initiation you are a full member of the coven and you're not doing a homework in the same way. Really depends on the group. There's an incredible amount of variation here. Similarly, I spoke to, years and years ago, I was speaking to an initiate who said that the transition when she first got initiated was very hard for her, because in the sort of pre-initiatory training that she'd been doing with her group, they'd met very frequently, right? They had met twice a month, I think, every other week, something like that. And then after initiation, they were only meeting monthly, and they weren't doing training outside of those monthly meetings. Like the environment shifted, and going from a very structured learning environment and a very structured environment where that was repetitive, going from a very structured environment that was also meeting very frequently to something that was much more freeform and a little bit more intermittent was a big transition for her, and she felt like, I don't mean to put words in anyone's mouths here, but it was a conversation that I remember, because she said like it took her a long time to adjust to this new environment because it was so different from what had been expected of her prior to initiation. So I think going into initiation, just having a conversation about what the expectations are around things like that, around learning, around attendance, around coven membership, responsibilities. Are there things that you're going to be expected to bring to ritual? Again, not all of this may be appropriate to discuss before initiation. Some of it may be a conversation that your coven leaders want to have after the fact. But insofar as you can, I think these are valuable things to discuss in broad terms before you make that transition, so that you know some of how your religious environment is going to change. And then the third big thing, this is going to be a relatively short video. How about that? The third big thing that I think is worth bringing up with your initiators, or your potential initiators rather, is any potential concerns, worries, fears, doubts that you have, anything that you are unsure about, anything that maybe you've heard something and you're frightened about it, or like, if you have questions, if you have doubts, if there's something that you think might be upsetting to you, talk about it now. Don't wait until you're halfway through the ritual and something happens and you're like, oh no, I didn't talk about this with my initiators and this is actually very uncomfortable and bad for me and I don't know if I can do this. Like, if you have something, if you say, whatever, we'll take the skyclad thing because that's a really obvious one. If you say, I'm not sure if I can do ritual nudity with other people, that's a conversation that you should have before initiation. That's something that should be talked about. And that's true for any boundaries that you have or any fears or worries that you have. You are always allowed to have your own boundaries. But sometimes what that means is if you have certain hard and fast boundaries, initiation might not be the right choice, and that's okay. But that's a conversation that's better to have now and not halfway through the initiation ritual or the day after the initiation ritual. So if you have concerns or boundaries that you want to discuss with your initiates, do it before initiation. With your initiators, not with your initiates. No, I think it's important. I think it's important to really be open about those questions and those doubts, because it's okay to have questions and doubts. But unless we sort of create a culture where we're comfortable having those conversations and being really frank about, like, what are you worried about? What are your concerns? Unless you are able to voice those concerns, you're not going to be able to go into initiation knowing that you are safe and that your boundaries are everyone's aware of them, everyone's going to respect them, and so on. And then similarly, relatedly, I think there's a question about triggers and traumas. If you have traumas, those are yours and you get to decide whether you discuss them with anyone else. You have no obligation to air out your traumas to other people if you don't feel comfortable doing so. But I think that going into initiation, because you don't know the specifics of what's going to happen in initiation, if there are certain things that you know could be triggering to you, I think it is a good idea. I won't say that you have to, because how people navigate their own traumas is really their business. But I think it is a good idea, if you know that there are certain things that could be triggering, to mention that to your initiators and have a conversation about that. There are also things where there are certain things that, like, skyclad, generally speaking, is kind of a hard and fast thing. If someone can't and won't do ritual nudity, probably the Gardnerian tradition is not going to be a right fit for them. There are other things that are more a matter of making accommodations, right? There are other things where if you say, I have this particular trigger, your initiators can say, okay, that's really good for us to know, so that we can have a conversation behind the scenes about how to make accommodations for that and prevent you from being triggered during this ritual or during subsequent rituals. So don't feel like if you have boundaries or if you have triggers or something like that, don't feel like that's going to disqualify you from initiation. If you're reaching a point where you and your initiators are seriously talking about initiation, they are going to want to make the accommodations that can be made for you. They're going to want to make the coven and the ritual a safe environment for you to be in so that you can experience that initiatory transformation. But they can only do that if they know that it needs to be done. So I think it's a really delicate conversation. It's something that people often feel very self-conscious about or very scared to bring up. But if you trust your coven leaders enough to want to be initiated with them, my hope is that you trust them enough that you feel you are able to have a really open and frank conversation about the things that you might be worried about, the doubts that you have, the fears that you have, and then also any potential triggers. So that is all I have for you tonight. It's a short video. Thank you for watching. I'm sure I will be back soon. Until the next time. Bye.